All right, welcome to the Quadruple D. This is take two of episode 65, part three. And in this episode, I'm looking at one of the worst people in the world, Vladimir Putin, and examining how his existence validates anarchist critics and their critiques of power and whatnot, which is something I frequently do on this podcast. Anyway, this relates to the previous episode of the Quadruple D because there I talked about Steve Witkoff, who has acted as a de facto envoy to Russian President Vladimir Putin. So it kind of ties in. So I'm going to start off by looking at sort of a part of Putin that might seem like it's a little bit like a fluff distraction or something, but it's actually a little bit more important than it seems. I'm going to get into, the macho imagery that he puts out there, like how he's been appearing at annual exhibition hockey games and stuff like that, and how he just wants to be seen like a tough guy. So he's often scoring 8+ goals with assistance from teammates and professionals, reinforcing an image of extreme strength rather than genuine competitive wins. But that image is something that these people feel is very important to put out there. He's appeared shirtless in staged photos of himself on a horse, like in 2009, and it's really designed to project a macho, physically robust, and a tough leader image to the public, and demonstrating fitness. And it's supposed to contrast with earlier, weaker Russian leaders. He's trying to suggest that he's not just sitting on a couch being lazy and boozing it up or whatever. He's out there being an athlete and all that kind of stuff. So it's really staged stuff. He's not alone out on the hockey rink, but the emphasis is going to be on Putin. He's participating in these exhibition matches that are basically just PR stunts. He's often out there with former NHL players, Russian stars, and politicians who seemingly afford him opportunities to score often and look highly skilled, ensuring he's treated as a top athlete. So, despite his dominant scoring in these matches in 2019, he actually suffered an embarrassing moment when he fell on his face after failing to notice a red carpet during a victory lap. So, whoopsies, you're not exactly Mr. Perfection out there, are you? So, normally when it comes to stuff like that, myself and a lot of other people, they might, look the other way. They might just say, "Oh, it was a mishap" and all that kind of stuff. But Putin is a prick. He's a warmongering a-hole. So it's a little different. It's okay to bully a bully to some extent. I mean, you kind of have to do that even if you're in high school. If somebody's like picking on you, one of the ways to get them to stop is to actually kind of bully them back a little bit. And it's actually more effective than you might think. Now, I'm not saying to do anything illegal. I'm not saying that violence should be encouraged, but sometimes it can be a little bit of a self-defense thing as well. So when you're mocking these people when they're trying to turn life into a victory lap for themselves, like an endless loop of a victory lap as they ruin the world around them, well, while they're doing that, it's okay to like point out their folly. So he also rode shirtless on that horse, that tough guy persona, and it really I don't know. I don't even know what to make of it. I mean, it's like just silly. The photos from his 2009 Siberian vacation where he had these carefully curated photos by the Kremlin to emphasize a masculine tough guy image and all that. It was just image management. It was designed to demonstrate that he is healthy and control and fit, and that's crucial for his public image, especially in contrast to these past leaders in a country with high alcohol abuse and all that kind of stuff. So he uses these images to show that he doesn't indulge in bad habits and whatnot, which is funny because that's something that Donald Trump doesn't even bother to engage in that much. He did these he did these fake WWE or WWF wrestling things back in the day. I think Trump even got an honorary thing where he's like in the Wrestling Hall of Fame or something like that. And pretty embarrassing because obviously he's not a skilled wrestler. And Jesse Ventura has mocked him for that, saying that he didn't deserve to be put in the Hall of Fame. And all of this political propaganda just it really gets pathetic. The photos that show him hiking, fishing, and riding bare chested. It's all just this strongman persona, and it's just too forced. And the display is generally not mocked within Russia because who knows what could happen to you if you were to mock Putin over there. But it is designed to show a physically robust leader and a defender of traditional, strong, and nationalistic values. And they've been these images have been heavily mocked by Western leaders and, of course, Putin critics. And it's so easy to make fun of his display of his pecs. Like that's not worthy of mockery. Come on, it's like people even make fun of regular bodybuilders. Like we're not going to make fun of Putin when he's trying to display his man titties out there on the horse. It's ridiculous. But anyway, it's you know psychologists would see it as like a curated projection of hyper masculinity, physical vigor, and undisputed dominance to bolster a cult of personality. And that's really what these people are about, the projection of prowess and dominance. And, Putin's participation in these exhibition games where he scores 8 or 9 goals. It's just a show. And, he's not out there playing an actual game. They're not going to you know attack Putin on the ice. The way you would do in a regular hockey game. And it's just so sad. And then you've also got Donald Trump's golf. um you know Trump has frequently been accused of cheating at golf, and you've even got admissions from people like Kid Rock about it. You know, Kid Rock actually said that it's a good thing that Trump cheats at golf because it's a win at all costs mentality sort of thing. And Kid Rock noted that while Trump cheats, he likes to win and that he would want such a fighter on his team. So think about that. I mean, Kid Rock is basically confessing right there that he doesn't value honesty and, playing by the rules. And, it really shows a refusal to accept any outcome other than total victory, even through fabrication and cheating. And it's really one of the biggest red flags about somebody, um, when it comes to their willingness to cheat at the game that they profess to love so much. If Trump is willing to lie and cheat out on the golf course, then nothing is sacred to the guy. So it's oddly enough one of those things that's a little bit more important than a person might think on the surface. And there was also for Trump there was an honorary black belt that he received. I think back in 2021, he was awarded an honorary ninth Dan black belt by the World Taekwondo headquarters. And even though it is symbolic and all that, I don't think anybody truly believes that he has the skills of a taekwondo master or any other martial art. In fact, he can't even master the marital arts because he can't keep his marriages together. He's been div- divorced numerous times. He's got his current wife on his side as like a business partner for appearances, but nobody actually thinks that he loves his wife or that she loves him or anything like that. It's all a show. And then you've got the Nobel Peace Prize thing. Trump has been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, and he's never won it though, and he's like actually trying to campaign for it, which is kind of something you're not supposed to do. You're not you're not supposed to be out there saying, "Give me the Nobel Peace Prize, I earned it," and then he's saying that he stopped like 8 different wars when he hasn't stopped a single one. In fact, he's starting multiple wars and threatening to start multiple wars. Not only do we have the war with Iran, but of course he's also threatened to invade Canada. He's threatened to invade Greenland and Mexico, and he's also attacking Cuba. He's got a blockade over there, and he's, you know, threatening to starve the population. Well, I'm sure some people are basically starving over there now. And, it's just a disgusting and pathetic thing. And then he wants all these different things named after himself and all that kind of stuff. And it's really very Putin-esque. So all of these things kind of tie together because these are all Vladimir Putin-esque traits. And he got a medal gifted to him by somebody in 2026, which was a substitute for the Nobel Peace Prize. And he's had fake press releases and stuff like that, celebrating his legacy as a peacemaker and all that kind of stuff. Just so sad when he's actually a warmonger and he's actually been in favor of genocides and all kinds of stuff like that. So when it comes to the psychological and strategic implications here, it's all about uh, how these narcissistic leaders use self enhancement behaviors to maintain a fragile sense of superiority. It's about propaganda and control. These displays are part of a broader propaganda machine designed to form a controlled public image, substituting relatability or strength for material reality. It's there's sycophancy. That's another word for it. These spectacles involve a parade of sycophancy where allies and subordinates help maintain the illusion of the leader's extraordinary talent. They're superior to practically everybody else. It's ridiculous, and it's it's just sad. So anyway, let's look at the other major scandals of Putin. So there's something called the Panama Papers, which revealed some of his hidden wealth in 2016. The Panama Papers revealed a network of offshore companies tied to people who are close to Putin. While his name did not appear directly, investigations suggested that billions in assets may be controlled through proxies. It reinforced these long-standing claims that Putin presides over a system of elite enrichment and financial control, an oligarchy, basically. And there's also the political repression and opposition crackdowns that Vladimir Putin has been guilty of. The treatment of critics like Navalny, including his poisoning, imprisonment, and eventual death in custody. That is all rightly drawn global condemnation, and independent media and protest movements have been systematically restricted because, that's what a free country just does. And this points to the erosion of political pluralism and the concentration of power in the state with Putin at the helm of it all. And you've also got, the human rights abuses in general when it comes to like torture and disappearances, uh, like in the Second Chechen War. So, the use of extreme state violence to maintain territorial control and all that kind of stuff. And he's trying to be an expansionist as well, of course, with the war against Ukraine. He's been involved in interfering in foreign elections too. Russia has been accused for a while now of interfering in democratic processes abroad, especially in the 2016 US elections through hacking and disinformation campaigns. And, it really makes you wonder, like, how much of this information warfare matters to these people because it seems like they invest a lot into it, to get people to change their minds. It's almost like the public at large is actually more powerful than they would have you believe. So that's why they're trying to get so much time and money and effort invested into hoodwinking the public. And of course, one of the biggest ones, the biggest scandal for many people is the invasion of Ukraine, which started in 2022. I believe that's when it started. I don't know. I'm not exactly a historian. You might be able to say, oh, it started a little bit earlier than that. But I think it really took off in 2022 anyway. It was a full scale invasion of Ukraine. It's one of the most consequential actions of Putin's entire pathetic career. There have been massive civilian casualties, displacement, and a lot of geopolitical fallout. So, this is possibly the most severe because of its scale and the human cost. But we'll see how much worse things get. He might have a lot more in store when it comes to his destructive capabilities. And let's look at the ways in which this sort of validates the anarchic perspective. So, from a radical viewpoint like that, it's not just about individual wrongdoing, but about the structure of centralized power itself. You've got concentration of power actually as the core problem here, if you really think about it. So, like, anarchists reject hierarchical authority in general, especially the state, but not exclusively the state. And Putin's system is highly centralized with decision making concentrated in a small elite. So, from this lens, the scandals of, they're not anomalies, but predictable outcomes of unchecked power. And you've got state violence being used as a tool of control. Events like the Chechen War and the Ukraine invasion are examples of how states use organized violence to maintain and expand authority, which anarchists typically oppose. They see war as a product of state competition and coercion, and therefore they tend to criticize those things. And what do you know? Coercion is really one of the key aspects of what is going on here. You've got suppression of dissent, the treatment of opposition figures and protest movements, and it all aligns with a classic anarchic critique. States tend to suppress challenges to their authority, especially when power is successfully consolidated and when they feel they are operating from a position of strength. That makes them bolder in their attempts to suppress any dissent. And then you've got the elite economic control aspect clearly on display in this case. The Panama Papers revelations could be interpreted as part of a broader pattern where political and economic elites will merge, undermining genuine equality and autonomy and imposing their pathetic worldviews in the process. And of course, this leads to an honorable mention. I don't want to totally sidestep this aspect of Putin's country either. The anti LGBT policies. Russia under Putin has enacted laws restricting LGBTQ plus expression, most notably the Russian gay propaganda law, as it's called, and other restrictions. So these laws represent state enforcement of social norms, They limit individual freedom and self expression. They show how state power can be used to marginalize minority groups, all things that would be criticized from the radical perspective. And anarchists generally oppose those types of policies because they impose top down control over personal identity and personal relationships. So, yeah, if you value freedom, you criticize people like Vladimir Putin pretty much just as a matter of course. Like, of course, you're going to criticize this crap. This isn't freedom here. He's micromanaging people's relationships and treating, people who just have a different sexuality as if they are all villains or something like that. When in fact, we already know that a huge percentage of heterosexual people are actually engaged in, violations of sex norms. I mean, that's what the Epstein files are all about. We know that it's not just the case that gay people are the only ones who commit sex crimes or something. That'd be an absurd claim, but that's what these conservatives, these right wingers, whatever, that's what they want you to think. Well, of course, you look at any group of people, you're going to find some people who do misbehave or whatever, you're going to find that. But really, it's just bigotry. They're capitalizing on bigotry and an identity of cultural supremacy. So, if you define the biggest scandal by scale and human impact, the invasion of Ukraine is probably the most significant, the most obvious scandal of Putin's reign, but it's certainly far from the only one. And you could have a look at the systemic corruption, like the Panama Papers and the internal repression. Those could stand out as well. He's just rotten. Everything he touches is rotten. His attempts to display himself as hyper masculine, they're too exaggerated. It's too cartoonish to actually believe that he's macho. If you're an actual tough guy or a badass, you kind of don't need to advertise that all the time. It's just something that everybody kind of knows about you right off the bat. So there are very few people who can pull off looking like they're tough guys and while kind of acting like they're tough guys. I would say one of the few people who can kind of pull that off is maybe somebody like Clint Eastwood. You rarely hear somebody actually mock Clint Eastwood for his macho demeanor or whatever. And maybe that's because it does seem a little bit naturalistic, but he kind of does seem to exaggerate it a little bit. But he's really one of the very few people who I think could successfully kind of pull that off. But even he gets made fun of a little bit for it. The gruff, macho type of attitude that he puts out there. But anyway, the key takeaway here is that these aren't isolated scandals. They're symptoms of a system that's built on centralized authority, coercion, and hierarchy rather than voluntary cooperation and individual autonomy. And hopefully, the future will see more actual freedom throughout the world, and not just in Russia, but throughout the whole world. We hopefully will start to reject more of this nonsense as we proceed. I want to say in a different direction, but I guess we'll see. Time will tell.